Yes. That's.
Oh.
Hey, hello, everyone on mic, hear us okay? Oh. Getting an echo. Somebody needs to.
I'm on mute.
Or mic. Okay. Oh, that might have been me.
Nope.
I got it. Okay. Go.
My mic was on.
Okay.
Solved the problem, Neil. It was me.
Might have been both of us.
Yeah, hey.
What else is new?
Hi, Jake.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Okay.
Hold on, everybody. Let me just grab the agenda.
I've got that located. Good. End of your reporting. Well, I anticipate having just every fiscal year. But
Okay.
Understood. FY 24. The Word document is gonna. Currently in the attachment folder. Yeah, and just classifying it by, you know.
What's going on?
Oh, I think Mary's unmuted, I think
All right, I think you're gonna have to deal with me today. Anne's on the call, but Anne came home from, Anne, you were out partying somewhere. I saw that on Facebook. Anne's under the weather today, so I'm gonna deal with running the meeting. Let's start with some intros from folks online. Anne, you wanna introduce? How's your voice? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Hi everyone, Ann Matek, GFFP, and I'm sorry I can't be there today, but yeah, I'm in COVID land, well, COVID vacation land in Teams land, and at least we can do it this way. So I'm happy to be here and I'm feeling pretty good, but didn't want to get you all sick, so.
Thanks, Ann. Bobby? You there, Toppy? We're just doing intros. Okay, we got Toppy Bolton with Campbell Global, Jonathan Chi.
How's it going, everybody? My name's Jonathan Chi. I'm with the NRCS. Sorry I couldn't attend in person.
Coral Evans.
Hello, everyone. Coral Evans, Northern Zone Director for U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, on the road. So I appreciate the opportunity to tune in.
Thank you, Coral. Jaden Peterson.
Hey everyone, Jade Peterson, forest ecologist with SWCA.
Matt McGrath.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Matt McGrath, District Ranger for Flagstaff, joining you from a fire in Oregon. Just for the first few minutes, and I'm gonna have to drop off. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Matt. And Mary.
Good, okay.
Hi there, Mary Lou.
Oh, you're muted.
Dang, I thought I clicked the button. Hey, Mary Lou Zimmerman. I'm with Forfry, monitoring coordinator. Thank you.
Okay.
And Toby, I think you dropped and then just joined us again. Are you in? No, I missed that maybe. Okay. And then around the room.
I'm Nikki Von Hedeman with the Ecological Restoration Institute. I'm the Human Dimension Specialist. Kat Edgley, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Forestry at NAU.
Kelsey Metzger, SWCA, field logistics coordinator and a biologist.
I'm Sarah Davenport. I'm a researcher at ERI working with Melanie and Nikki in the policy and communication shop.
Jonathan Tinney, I'm a PhD student at NAU in the remote sensing and geoinformatics lab. Noah Baker, newly full-time with the fire department as a wildfire and climate specialist.
Diane Bosick, I help coordinate the Forest Biomass Coalition, which is part of the GFFP.
Hi, Melanie Colavito. I'm the director of policy and communications at the ERI.
Good morning, Jake Smith, Forest Restoration Director, Coconino County Flood Control District. Morning, Jake Dallin, District Timber Staff, Flagstaff Ranger District.
And Logan has joined us as well. Do you want to introduce yourself online, Logan?
Sure. I'm Logan Mikas. I'm the acting deputy district ranger on the Flagstaff Ranger District.
And Tavi, are you with us?
Yeah, hey guys. A little bit of technical difficulties. I got logged on. I'm at our corporate office here in Portland and it started blasting at like 11 volume. So I had to get on my phone to not embarrass myself. So anyway, it's good to see you guys.
Thanks, Tavi. And Paul, you want to introduce real quick? Paul just walked in.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Paul Etrugi, Wildland Fire Battalion Chief here at the city. For those that haven't met, nice to see everybody.
I think that is everyone. Let me get the agenda back up. Okay, introductions, and then we move to Flagstaff Ranger District Operations Update.
Do you want to see if Matt wants to say anything before he jumps off?
Matt, do you want to jump in before you gotta leave the meeting with any updates or anything?
No, I've got like 10 minutes. I'll let Jake go.
So my map's up over there. If that works. I know people on the screen aren't going to be able to see it. For those of you in the room.
Here, I'll try to move the mouse on the screen wherever Jake's talking.
So right now, we really don't have too many operations going on as far as like logging and machine operations go. There's been some changes, fluctuations in the timber market. So things have kind of slowed down with regards to how much we're moving off of the forest and into other markets. But it's a really nice time to kind of catch up, get all things, a bunch of stuff closed out. We do have a ton of, I usually don't go over hand bending projects, but I'll cover some of those today because a couple of them are in some interesting spots. So I'll do real quick. I'm just going to cover the timber sales and the IRSCs that we have operating right now. So we start kind of in that upper Rio de Flag wing east here, kind of in the middle in that green. Operations are currently going in there. That's Perkins Timber out of Belmont. They've cut over 600 acres, cut, skid, process, deck, remove, firewood, everything is looking very good. Well ahead of schedule, I think, as far as we were expecting. They've cut about 600 acres in about 5 months. So a lot of really cool stuff going on up there. You know, as we all may or may not know, that's where the big focus is right now. As of yesterday, the Hawk project located in blue, gray, whatever color you see that as, that SPA supplemental project agreement was executed yesterday with the Nature Conservancy, with a bunch of partners, Coconino County, to include some of these island units in Little Wing. So that's a fully funded, well, we hope fully funded project that's going to kind of mimic similar to what Wing East does. It's full biomass removal, full fiber removal, is the hope. Yeah, so TNCs, they got some, they're at work on their RFPs and all that stuff, but it's falling in a similar situation where there's a lot of acres being awarded right now at the end of the fiscal year. There was a ton awarded this previous year. I think we were number 3 or 5 in the nation, the Coconino National Forest with acres awarded. So, yeah, the pot's kind of full right now.
Max says 5.
5, yeah. So Tavi, Joel, and all the folks at Chemical Global and Nature Conservancy are working some different strategies to try to get, if nothing, going this year, early in late winter, early spring, to try to get a bunch of those acres punched out. really good stuff. Right now, we don't have anything on deck for the DERPA, that northern portion of the upper Rio, the northern eastern section. We're still kind of working through some details. Little Springs, which is up in White Horse Park, I think is the name of the community. That's should be starting up here relatively soon. That's the last year on the contract for that. Working further south in this wing west, this light blue on the southwestern portion of the upper Rio, that kind of includes or, nestles up to the experimental forest. That's an IRTC. That's huge. It's like 5,200 acres over 50,000 CCF. So we're hoping to put that out to advertisement sometime the next couple 4 weeks or so. But that probably won't get awarded for another 2 months. Jumping far west, we have the Walker Hill Timber Sale owned by R4 Restoration Forest Products out of Belmont. They are pretty much at a pause right there. They're just getting everything. I think they're going to start doing a little bit of cleanup work on the CIDAP side of that project area. But at this point, we're not looking to sever any more stems. It's just going to be cutting, skidding, fixing temp rows, fixing ruts, all that closeout work until the spring. Walker Hill demo, that's completed. Still waiting on some data for that, but I think it's right on the doorstep. Working more central, just north of A1 Mountain, A1 North, that was an IRTC awarded to R4 as well. No operations, they haven't done anything in there. South of that A1 South Timber Sale, that's Joe Dirt Excavation. They are in the final stages of closeout for that. So Sam, all the timber's been cut, everything's been removed. Now it's just consolidating piles, kind of making piles nice, getting everything ready to burn. But that was a long, great project for Joe. I think it was like just over 6 years, maybe 7 years that he was out there. But it's a big project. It's over 2,500 acres. So, but yeah, a lot of good work in there. That's where Ancestral Lands and Arizona Conservation Corps is doing some work for Wood for Life over here on this western portion of the road. A lot of really cool project work being done over there. So if you find yourself looking for some innovative work to see be done, it's all right in that area. FWPP footprint, nothing anticipated this year. The Schultz Pass Timber Sale is owned by Delhi, thank you. That just got hit with another MRCTA, so a market contract term adjustment, which basically extends the life of the contract because of cost of living, different variations in the market. But we do have a bunch of hand thinning going on up in there, the 556 road. There's some hand thinning going on over there. We've got the log deck. There's still between 3,000 and 5,000 cords that are going to get processed and or hauled off first, but all sent out to different wood banks throughout Navajo and Hopi, and we hope to have that completed by the spring. What's not on here is the Timberline Wupaki hazardous tree fuels reduction project that kind of sits on that western border of the Timberline Wupaki trails neighborhoods. We're about 40% complete on that. All that wood is being removed as firewood, and it's basically cutting anything that's dead or dying within the next 3 years. So lots of wood coming off the forest. Will you scroll down on my screen? We get to Southside Airport, this northern section of Lake Mary. Not much going on there. They got their hands full on some other contracts down on the Mogan Rim. That again, another MRCTA, so it just extends the life of that contract, which is kind of unfortunate for all of us. But yeah, so he's been working in there, doing some cleanup work and preparing for the winter time, but we don't anticipate anything major going on until snow melt for that. The Marshall project area, that was one of the 3 projects in the Readiness and Environmental Protection Initiative. That is a combination of the National Forest Foundation, the city, Cook County, a bunch of different people. NFF awarded that to Miller Timber out of Bend, Oregon, I believe. They have a cut to length Ponzi operation, very, very different than anything we have ever seen here. They're supposed to start working on roads today, and it's going to be likely mostly an over snow operation with, we're saying up to 8 different sites, so 16 different harvesters, is what they're hoping for.
Is Miller trying to keep a crew down here for the long term, or are they heading back?
No, their desire is to have sites here permanently. They're big into resource protection, side slopes. A cut to length operation offers us the ability to not have need for a lot of landings, a lot of road networks, soil stability, all that stuff. So we're potentially going to be doing a broadcast chip on site. So everything up to a 2-inch bowl will get removed and will be part of Wood for Life, to be removed off site. And then so all the sticks and smaller than 2-inch, they'll basically have a Ponzi out front with the bunk just getting filled up with logs of varying sizes. And then the Ponzi coming in behind them, same exact setup. The only difference is on that boom, there's going to be 2 booms. One of them is going to have a chipper built right into it, so they can just shred the chips into the chipper and then kind of strategically space it out. We've got a limited, we're doing kind of like a pilot demo, give them like 20 to 40 acres to see what our chip depth is and what the shred looks like and all that stuff, to see if from the fire and fuels angle, it's something that is an option long term, or at least in that area, because it's just like 3-4 main ridges. They just go along, and so it makes it really complicated for a transportation network. So,
Also not just like standard Ponderosa pine, there's a bunch of like PJ in there.
yeah, a bunch of juniper. It's not a very productive site, so.
Is anyone looking at wildlife or ecological impacts of that?
For the shred depth and chips and stuff like that. Yeah, we're talking about it, and then doing get people out on the ground kind of before and after scenarios, but we don't really have a bunch of historic treatments where we tried it. We've done a couple mastication projects out here, but the shred just gets so light, especially when we're removing all that, like the actual hard material. Again, the A1 project, we went back in after they completed out a lot of this stuff to Timbersdale, so we didn't remove any of the TSI. We went through with Market had, I think, 4 to 8 different masticators on there at a time, and you could never even, the shred just disappears. So yeah, it's one of those kind of experiments. That was their primary proposal, but we required them to have an alternate proposal. So if it didn't work, we have a plan to change it up.
I'm sorry, where did you say that Market project was, where the shred disappeared?
So A1 timber sale.
A1 timber.
Yes.
A1 South.
A1 South, thank you. And Mark Nabel is the person that ran all of those projects. So anytime you want to go out and look, just hit a Mark, it looks really nice. And we plan on doing that, following up on a lot of this stuff. Because again, these sites were logged 70s, 80s, and it's just the productivity is so low that you can't get like a straight log out of any of these trees. So our options were really limited. Cool. So while we're on that topic, moving down into that Upper Lake Mary watershed, the Johnny's project area, we're looking to do some significant road reconstruction, some alternatives in there. For those of you that may or may not know, there's a lot of packs in this whole area. Makes life kind of difficult, but Johnny's is that third kind of leg of the REPI grant, and we anticipate road work starting this fall, or we would like to, with project work starting springtime, early summer. But the National Forest Foundation has that as well, and that's got a significant amount of funding attached to it as well. And that's a DOD grant combined with a bunch of other funding sources. And then the final leg of that REPI is the Weimer Springs down here in the little gray. You can't really see it. It's a really small amount of acres, but it's kind of like the buttoning up of a bunch of different projects in the packs, a bunch of different research stuff that whole MSO research has. So it's a lot of like hand carrying, hand removal. We're trying to get a lot of that stuff's going to go to Wood for Life. But they're going to be they have just this season to complete that whole project.
Weimer Springs, Mormon Mountain Timber Sale, and Johnny's are all in the upper, or just the Lake Mary watershed footprint. So those have been a big priority for the city over the years as well as part of the FWPP concept.
Oh, yeah, so you got your Mormon Mountain timber sale, that's Suarez logging, same thing, MRCTA, so he's got several years to do a really small chunk, but and this area gets really wet, so it's operations, you gotta really just be ready when the time's right. Bootleg Antelope, that was also awarded same time as A1 North, and that's Restoration Forest Products. That's MSO restricted. You can't get any wood out of there during the MSO restrictions. So that's some complications that they're seeing with that. The last two main ones on this Newman Park and the Frog Tank Timber Sale, those are again Restoration Forest Products. I would say Newman Park, they're probably both of them, they're in that 60 to 70% complete range. They've moved a lot of wood out of that area. Last year we had a lot of lessons learned with the 700 road, weird snowfalls. So they changed up their tactics and they're doing much better, but they've gotten a lot of good work done in there, and I would anticipate next year we'll set all that stuff out. And the stuff that's in the gray, that's owned by Dakota Logging. Horse Park has like 200 acres or so left. It's a diameter cap unit that makes it difficult, but same thing, same timeline. Those two are probably going to be done and buttoned up by the end of next year. So we've got a lot awarded. There's a lot of stuff that's really kind of on that brink of being completed and done. There's a lot of work that came out down on the rim, and so they're just trying to like be fair and equitable about where they're going and how they're doing it. A lot of good work. Any questions? The other update that I have is we're currently doing the final inspection on the Snowball Road Phase 2 hazard tree clearing. So that was a full fiber removal, same. All that wood's going out to the Freeman Ferry Road. Reuse and some pile burning up there, but good project done.
What does pump house wash work, is that still slated for next year? When do we have a timeline at all on that one?
I would say like cutting and harvesting operations. If I had a crystal ball, I would say it might be moved out to the right a little bit. Work is still getting done. We're having issues with the painting, the marking, all that stuff. Not just from an industry side, but we are likely losing our ability to have seasonal employees as well. So it's just kind of that chokehold's getting put on us. But there's going to be continual work done. It's just how long it takes to actually get cutting work done. Any other questions? Matt, you got anything you want to add?
Not operations. I'll just add, describe fire-wise, looking at getting started probably in about 2 weeks. A couple priority areas, particularly the Timberline, Burn, Weatherford, right off of 556 over Eldon Springs Road. That's one where we're currently prepping along people's fence lines and Timberline, and we're working with all of the folks from ERI and NAU in the room on some work, kind of follow-up work that they've already been doing in other areas about smoke and people's perceptions. I'm sure they'll talk about that a little bit more. We're stoked to be working with them on that. Probably that won't start before October 15th. Before then, it's kind of condition dependent. There's some stuff down south of Mormon Lake proper, like on the west side, called Mint West, a couple thousand acres there, eagle and owl issues. So those have to get done in the fall. So really looking forward to getting in there and getting those done. We could build off of that in the spring. And then also over kind of just west of Wing West, Maxwell Springs, kind of continuation of the work we were doing in the spring, the last couple of years. Wild Bill working south along 180 down to Maxwell, kind of between Walker Hill and Wing West, those areas where we don't have plans to do any thinning for the next few years, while we're doing the thinning on the east side of the road, burning along the west side of the road. To treat as many acres over there in that upper Rio side as possible. A couple others, we can always go north of the peaks, depending if conditions warrant, maybe out by Crater Sinks, but those are the priority ones that we're definitely looking at getting done this fall. End of report.
Thank you, guys.
Any pushback on Weatherford?
Actually, surprisingly, Jay, no. We started going to some, the sheriff has there's like the neighborhood watch type meetings out there every month. And we go to those occasionally. We went, what is it, probably like in June or July, and started talking about this to give folks a lot of notice and a lot of time to think about it. And I was kind of surprised. I thought I'd at least get some jeers or heckles or things thrown at me, but we didn't. Folks understand the need for the work. I think obviously the tunnel fire was not a great outcome, but I think that showed people the importance of continuing to do this work in that area. So it's probably still a few folks, and we'll be going back to that meeting in 2 weeks, and then potentially doing like a site visit with residents and anybody in the community. Maybe we're not sure if there's really interest in that, but if folks would like to go walk around and see what we're planning on doing and how we do it, we'll be doing that. But in general, it's kind of broad brush, but I'd say in general, that area is supportive of the project.
Any other questions for Flagstaff Ranger District update? Well, thank you too, both for that. It's quite a busy district. I like to hear that. Okay,
Thanks, all.
moving into recent social science on forest and fire management. Melanie, Kat, and Nikki. You want to? Yeah, just plug that guy in, and it should give us the option to put you. You'll have to share your screen for the meeting, but then it should be. Giving us the. Stand by, everyone. You can always open it up.
My team's being weird. I don't see where.
Want me to plug in? You sent it to us so I can open it. That's okay. Share. Are you guys seeing that online yet? Thumbs up. You see the presentation? Excellent. Okay. Yeah, just tell me when you want me to change.
Great. Thank you everyone for being here today. So essentially what we are doing is presenting on several different studies. Is it okay if we sit and are you all hearing okay? Okay. On research social science that we've done in the greater Flagstaff area. Once again, I'm Nikki Von Heumann, Melly Colavito, and Kat Edgley are here with me to present on just a kind of a body of work that we think will be interesting. And apologies to a few folks who have seen these presentations before, but we have added some new material as well, and hope it'll be really useful. So if you want to go ahead. We are, Melanie and I are part of the and Sarah are part of the Ecological Restoration Institute here at Northern Arizona University. I know many of you are very well versed in what we do, but just a refresher for those of you who might not know quite as well. Our goal is to serve diverse audiences with objective science and implementation strategies that really support ecological restoration and climate adaptation. We try to provide the best available science in many different realms related to these themes, in ecology, social science. What we have here is most of our social science team today, as well as economic and operational efficiency areas as well. And our goal is to make sure that this science is available and the support is available to implement this kinds of science with a variety of audiences, federal managers. Everyone in this room can be benefiting hopefully from the kind of work that we do. And so we are one of 3 institutes in the Southwest trying to just kind of bridge the realm between science and management in order to address these issues. So that's the brief primer on the ERI, and then I'll hand it over to Melanie to dive into a few of our studies.
Well, yeah, thanks. As Nikki said, I know some of you have heard these findings, Jay, a lot of times. So I will go quickly through a couple of the highlights. And just so you know, we have briefing paper here that covers all the highlights we're going to talk about today. And then some of the newer information I have a fact sheet on as well. So happy to hand out those materials. One of the things that we have been working on over the last couple of years, and really this started in 2011, shortly after the 2010 Schultz fire, is a project to document the full costs of that fire. So not just looking at the cost of fire suppression, but what were the economic costs that continue to accrue over time from that event. Next slide. Okay. I thought I deleted this slide. Anyways, thanks. It's gone. No, it's gone. I wasn't going to go into the methods, but if you have questions about how we went about calculating all of this, happy to go into that. Given that we have a short amount of time, I think what we wanted to highlight was that we looked at a 10-year period of time for a single event and looked at a number of different cost types. Some of those are direct costs, so things that are directly associated with that event, and then most of them are indirect costs, so costs that are associated but not like direct fire suppression. When you total those all up, the largest group of costs or cost types were government and utility expenses. This includes things like county put a ton of money into this, Forest Service, cleaning up the fire event itself, and then of course the post-fire flooding. We used a complicated economic analysis to essentially estimate the value of a threatened and endangered species being displaced because of this fire. So we know that the Mexican spotted owl has habitat that was burned by the Schultz fire. Based on studies following that event of MSO, the habitat sort of reduced in size, and we were able to measure an economic effect of society's willingness to pay for the existence of threatened and endangered species has a value. So we included that as well. We looked at the effect of the fire and flooding on house sale price losses. Now, initially we looked at the effect of it on assessed price loss, but when you looked at the assessed prices in 2010 and then again in 2020, they went down and then they went way up because that's who has a house here in Flagstaff. It's expensive. So when you average that out over a 10-year period of time, it was no longer a negative number. But we can look at, so it's not considered a cost in that sense over time. So it had costs though in a discrete period, and those are directly associated with sale prices. So we were able to use another type of approach to determine the effect of that on sale price. There were costs associated with insurance. So these are costs accrued to individuals paying out of pocket for insurance premiums, for costs not covered by insurance, cleanup associated with flooding, things like that, prevention and mitigation on the property. And I didn't explain anything about the Schultz fire, but I'm just assuming everybody knows enough about that event. General nodding. Okay. Another cost category was loss of life, which was an unfortunate outcome of some of the post-fire flooding. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically we summed this all up over a 10-year period of time. When you bring it all together, a very conservative estimate of the total costs of the 2010 Schultz fire is a little over $111 million. Should be noted that, relatively speaking, this is a smaller acreage fire now than what we're seeing nowadays. There were no structures burned as a result of that fire. So what this can show is a method for what categories of information you might want to accrue, and it also sends the message that these costs don't stop when the fire goes out. Next slide. There's just another way of looking at it. So this figure shows those costs from 2010 to 2019, the total amount of costs in millions of dollars. And you can see that generally that first year, 2010, that orange bar is the highest. And then there's a general decline over time with some variability. Like in 2015, there was a pretty big flood infrastructure project put in. But 89% of those costs, including most of that post-fire flooding, mitigation, loss of life, all of that, were indirect costs, so not directly associated with that fire. 10% were directly associated with fire suppression, and 1% were also considered a direct cost, which is the habitat loss. Next slide. We also did some estimating to better understand, like, if this area had been treated and this fire was not as catastrophic as it was, what might have been potential cost savings. This is a little bit of a more difficult thing to estimate. So this is very preliminary and there are a lot of caveats. I'm not going to go into all of them right now. Nonetheless, we can make rough estimates about an average treatment cost per acre. Again, tons of variability in that actual number, but if we think about an average for mechanical thinning for prescribed fire, we could begin to say if the area that was the Jack Schultz project that was planned but not implemented prior to the Schultz fire had occurred, it might have been around $12.5 million. And if the full cost of fire was $111 million, or about $7,345 per acre, the full cost of fire was 4.5 times the proposed cost of restoration. Again, probably a conservative estimate, lots of caveats, but attempting to begin to calculate this was one of our goals. Next slide. We also did work with to better understand the effect of this fire on residents. So there was a survey that was done by the ERI immediately following that fire. And then we followed up on that in 2019, working with CAT and the School of Forestry. Some of the questions that we asked immediately following the fire, we couldn't ask again 10 years later. Things like direct costs people had accrued because of that fire, things that just weren't really measurable 10 years later. So we added some questions around the effect. Big way here. More than 10 years later, almost, this fire affected the building in multiple ways. So we had an effort as a result of the for 25% saying I'm still experiencing stress, and some learners reporting that existing health conditions are worse and things like this. Big picture story, these fires have long-term effects. Next slide. So that was fast and furious, and now I'm moving on to another thing. All right, again, we have highlight deeper information on all of this stuff, so you're just getting like a really summary of a bunch of work going on in this area. Another thing that we did following on the heels of the full cost accounting was estimating the revenue limits. And so we're essentially trying to put an economic value or estimate the benefit and cost in this type of work. And this type of study has not been done before. So if we're taking a full cost of fire, that kind of looking back, what is the bang for your buck on restoration and future?
I got that is getting out a little bit. Let's make sure we turn that.
Can talk louder. Okay.
We're all frozen.
Is it pointing head to his leg better? Like I
Somebody threw it in the chat. Logan, I see you're unfrozen. Everybody else seems to be unfrozen. Audio is breaking up.
Is it at least transcribing?
So I know it's recording. Anyway, better now. Okay, let's just power through. We've got a recording. I know it'll be okay on the recording.
You know where to find me.
Yeah.
I'll go over it anytime. All right, so let's just, go to the next slide. The purpose of this study was to begin to estimate an economic return on investment from doing field treatments and forest restoration. I'm going to skip over all the methods. If you want to hear about those later on, let me know. And just hit on the findings for the purpose of today. So if we think about forest restoration and field treatments in high risk, high value watersheds, we can categorize that into two different types. So there's the avoided cost of wildfire, and there are methods for calculating what might have been avoided if these fires didn't occur. We can use things like the study that we did to document the full cost of fire to help supplement those methods. So that's one category of cost. If you look at this figure up here, the orange is, okay, all of our benefits of forest restoration. The two green boxes, we have avoided wildfire costs, so that's AWC. And then we have enhanced initial ecosystem services. So ecosystem services being all of the things that we get from having a healthy forest, things like that have a value. We can get woody biomass, which is obviously something we're dealing with quite a lot, which may have an economic value. Water yield, hunting, recreation, things like this, property value. So there's a bunch of categories of ecosystem services. And this is all based on just a teeny bit of methods, based on studies that have been published about. So there is obviously probably a lot more to the benefits of forest restoration than what is on this diagram, but this represents where we have published research that attempts to quantify that information. So if we think about those two categories, avoided wildfire costs and enhanced initial ecosystem services, these are kind of all the things that contains. So for avoided wildfire costs, avoided costs of suppression, avoided costs of the built environment, that's things like effects of fire on water infrastructure, structures like homes, other types of infrastructure. Effects to ecosystem services have a negative cost, so carbon release, rehabilitation costs, all those kinds of things that are affected by fire occurring, and then effects on health, air quality, well-being, fatalities, things like that. So the blue are the broad types of avoided wildfire costs, and then the gray are the benefit types.
So Melanie, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
is this separate research from what you did in 2010 and 2019?
Yeah,
This a different?
this is
Oh,
new.
okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Is
Yeah.
this published?
Yeah, we just published it. So next slide. So that's kind of what we looked at. We're trying to put a number, a dollar value on if you invest in forest restoration, how much return on investment can you expect? So what you can expect in high risk, high value watershed with forest restoration is for every dollar invested, you may expect $7 of return on investment using this methodology. And this figure over here just kind of shows the mean of those benefit cost ratios, which I'm not going to go into the details of all of that right now, but just kind of get a sense for the relative effect of these different things. Property value has a relatively big effect. But biomass, the built environment. So just kind of giving you a sense of like the relative amounts of economic effect that each of these categories has. And I'm happy to go into further detail about how we came up with this number. It's definitely a conservative estimate. But if we're doing this work in these types of environments, like the greater Flagstaff area, this is a case that can begin to be made for the economic return on investment. We've been asked for this forever. And so just trying to finally get a sense, and that would equate to about a 600% return on your investment.
On the low end.
On the low end. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't see any way that number gets lower, but I see lots of ways that gets higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Is this over like the 10-year time span that you were talking about earlier, roughly?
Nope, this is separate from the 10-year time span. This is just a snapshot in time.
Okay.
And I'll pass these around if you're interested in the fact sheet from that. And then there's also summary of all this stuff. So I think that's everything I've got.
So I gotta go, but I just wanted to throw this out there that right now in these like more in-depth stuff like Wing East and Hawk, like we're seeing in the neighborhood of like $1,400 to $1,600 per acre, like costing from start to finish.
Yeah.
With full product removal. Yep.
Yeah.
You're gonna,
Higher than what we,
well, no, what? I didn't see, no, that's what I was gonna ask earlier.
we're around 12 something.
You can go back to the slides to
But still, like,
Yeah.
there, I mean, $1,500 an acre.
1285, so.
Get everything done, like that's
Yeah.
incredibly good price.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying, this is kind of like based on relatively old numbers too, but about $1,300 an acre for mechanical thinning. And then if you add prescribed fire, you're at that 15, 16.
Not bad, 12 years ago, I mean, costs haven't gone up that much, so.
But I mean, we've been talking since, before I've WPP, like what's the value of that restored acre?
Yep.
What are all these costs that you should you're willing to pay, you
Yeah.
know, to protect that landscape and like what's gonna happen in that upper Rio. I mean, it buys us a significant amount of time. For the investment.
Yep.
Thank you for including prescribed fire, because I think sometimes that's forgotten in these costs. Not that we want to be saying it costs more money than it does, but I think sometimes there's a trend of assuming that, you know, putting trees on trucks is restoration. That's not restoration. That's a tool in the restoration toolbox. Getting the fire numbers in there is important, both cost wise, but also just continuing that comprehensive narrative.
Are these assumptions based off of just ponderosa pine forest, or is this also mixed conifer?
We're saying it's frequent fire forests, so generally frequent fire forests in the west.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm still going.
That's good. Thanks, everybody. Sorry, I had to duck out of here earlier. Appreciate it.
I just thought there was something in the chat. I wanted to make sure if there was, I caught it. Good.
Is it okay if we?
Yes, grab it. Thank you.
Oh, no.
Oh, so Jake was saying 1,400 to 1,600 per acre now is what the cost was.
Okay, we're ready to move along to the next piece. So I think we came possibly to a GFFP meeting in 2020 over Zoom or something like that. We'd originally done a study of the museum fire right after it happened, within a couple of months. So this is 29 museum fire, didn't cause any structure loss, but there was a lot of concern about post-fire flooding afterwards. So we came here a few years ago and talked about this 2019 survey. I like to survey mixed mode, so that is mail to households. But then folks also have the option to participate online if they prefer. And then the city of Flagstaff at the time really kindly let us have a version up online on their website as well. So we were able to get a decent number of responses back then, nearly 800 responses. And at the time we were asking people, what do you think about post-fire flood risk? How did the fire affect you? Trying to get a baseline on the off chance that flooding did occur later on. And unfortunately it did. But that was a great opportunity to restudy a lot of these households. The sample frame was a little bit different from that first study. We opened it up a bit more to include some areas that maybe didn't expect to be in flooded areas. And we were really neutral in the second survey in 2022. We just called it flooding. We didn't say post-fire flooding or rainfall-driven flooding. We didn't label it at all. And part of our interest was in kind of getting a feel for where people thought the risk was coming from. But what we'll do today between Nikki and I is kind of reflect a little bit on the 2019 survey and share a few bits and pieces from this more recent 2022 survey, asking for experiences with that flood event. So back in 2019, we were asking folks about how they received information about the museum fire. At the time, just under 60% were relying on social media pretty heavily. And if I remember correctly, it was Twitter and Facebook and a little bit of Nextdoor. So we didn't ask whether they were using official accounts or following official accounts, but this was clearly a place a lot of people went. And a piece of good news was that the vast majority of these respondents had also signed up for the Coconino County Emergency Alerts, although at the time they didn't necessarily make the connection that information like Ready, Set, Go would come through that channel. 41% in that old survey expected to be notified in person whether they should evacuate or not. And we've talked a lot since this research about the need to kind of manage this expectation, especially with a fast moving fire in this area. And I know since this study, is it City of Flagstaff or the whole of Coconino County, just City of Flagstaff, I think, who redid the zoning for evacuation. So there's a new zone.
It was a whole
County. What was that?
It was a whole county and city, but.
So I think that's a great move in the right direction. There was a lot of confusion in the 2019 survey in the back comments about Lockett Ranches versus Lockett Meadows, stuff like that. So we followed up in 2022 and asked people what kind of information sources they were using and how they learned about post-fire flooding or flooding more generally in their area. More than half were getting notified through the National Weather Service / Coconino County Emergency Alert System, which kind of shared out the same message. Then another half were kind of really picking up on just noticing it in the street. They could select all that applied to them. So there's probably a decent amount of overlap between the two of these. A lot of folks were also following local weather forecasting. So it really seems like we have this shift towards more weather-oriented information sources when it comes to flood events. And less than 1% said that someone had come to their property to officially notify them, which I think is a secondary piece of evidence about lowering this expectation if someone will come in person for all hazards in the Flagstaff area.
Does that include the sirens? Because we started getting that in Sunnyside.
I don't think at the time that a siren set up yet.
23, I think.
Oh, yeah, it's 23.
Came in right after this. You guys did this study.
Yeah, I think it was a few months possibly before, but I do remember we give a space on the back of the surveys for people to write in additional comments, and there was a number of comments at the time about could we have a siren system? So we knew even back then there was interest. We often ask about trust in information sources, where are people getting the information from, how trustworthy are they? This is side by side. I'll note that the question we asked in these surveys was slightly different. In 2019, we asked about trustworthiness of fire-related information. In 2022, we asked about trustworthiness of information. And you can see across the board, there was a decrease in trust. Also, this, but they all declined significantly. I don't think that this is a criticism of the agency. I think this is more of a reflection of where to go for flood risk information. Flagstaff often really well communicated where to go for fire information. In this kind of secondary hazard, it's not as apparent.
I think the local fire department head might have also been related to Summit Fire was in the process of discussing some rearrangements that included browning out a station.
Yep.
And so the public was probably down on the fire department at the time in general.
Talking about the flood events themselves in, was it 2021 that flooding happened? So we asked folks to reflect on those events. One big set of questions we had was about household impacts, and that's both physical and kind of personal as well. 30% of the households we surveyed said they had some amount of damage. Most of that was not structural. It was just kind of in their backyard or on the street kind of stuff. 21% reported damage to the interior of their home. So maybe a little bit higher than we originally anticipated. Then there were some other kind of maybe less severe impacts, folks rearranging schedules around flooding and not attending work. The questions in the Schultz firework that Melanie shared about well-being got a lot of traction. So we did bring that in and expanded a little bit in this survey. So the yellow is strongly agree to moderately agree. So we were asking folks about mental health impacts and physical health impacts. The ones that were most repeatedly brought up, safety concerns, worry about the future of flooding, which I think is a good sign for public buy-in on mitigation activities around this topic, anxiety, stress, losing sleep, they all kind of drop off, but we're still talking, 20% of respondents across a lot of these. The existing or the continuing health issues was the smallest group there. So we have continuing evidence about the impact of fires to well-being in this area and flood events too. We asked folks about flood insurance too. We just had a paper published on this, so if you want more information, let us know. And in that piece, we were looking more at different groups and who does and doesn't buy flood insurance after fire. But in this survey, we found that 22% of our respondents, and I should mention most of our respondents in this survey, or most of our sample frame was an area with identified flood risk. 22% purchased flood insurance, most frequently right after the museum fire. 63% retained it by the time we surveyed them. So that's a little bit higher than some of our previous studies, I think. Only 4% of that 22% filed an insurance claim. So really low number of insurance claims, although relatively higher number of impacts internal to the house. And then 15% said they had impacts that were not covered by insurance. And I'd say most of those, there's a lot of parallels to the Schultz fire, things like landscaping, driveways. We asked folks too about what they'd done to mitigate risk on their property. And we saw kind of a doubling in the number of households reporting that they were using sandbags between 2019 and 2022. So that work by the city, the county, United Way clearly paid off in kind of more recent outreach efforts after the fire. And then folks had done a whole assortment of other activities, clearing their sidewalks or the roads, parking their vehicles off the street, except for that one person with a Prius, unfortunately. And then building emergency state kits. 66% said they didn't take action because they didn't feel like their flood risk was high enough to invest in it. So to summarize this little piece up, people seem to be looking at really different information sources for fire versus flooding, and we need to think a little bit more, understand that a little bit more. Why do they go to certain places? What are they expecting? And how do we increase the trustworthiness of that information? That could be additional studies down the road. We want to emphasize the connection between preparation and mental health. We did a little bit of statistical testing, and there was a really strong connection. People who reported higher well-being often had done a lot more on their property. And then it seemed like in conversations and in the survey data, a big barrier was funding or finances at the household level to engage in mitigation. If you think about Sunnyside and areas like that and the cost of flood insurance, that might open the door for us to be more creative about different sources of support for private property in the future. I'll pass it over to Nikki.
Perfect. And then we had a series of questions asking about folks' perceptions of forest and fire management that I think are really interesting. In the 2019 survey, we asked folks a series of questions just trying to gauge their kind of fire knowledge and acceptance. And so we kind of had high responses for all of these that, you know, over 85% respondents thought that were aware of the reported cause of the museum fire, which was, you know, potentially related to forest thinning efforts going on in that area. And yet folks were still really supportive of agreeing with statements like that fire is a natural part of the landscape around Flagstaff and that the landscape will recover from the museum fire. So we thought that was a positive reaction to understanding of how the museum fire started. We also then asked a series of really interesting questions about how residents see forest management in the 2022 survey. And so most folks were really thought continued forest management would have really good outcomes. So about 75% and higher of respondents agreed that forest management would do things like improve forest health, reduce the risk of catastrophic fire, improve watershed health, minimize these future costs of wildfire, reduce the cost of post-fire flooding, minimize future costs of, reduce the risk of flooding, and then minimizing future costs of flooding, and then also protecting the city's water resources. We also asked a little bit more specifically about what types of forest management residents would be interested in seeing and what they would support. And it was encouraging to see that around 75% or 75% higher of all respondents found that all these different types of forest management would be acceptable. The most popular thing was strategic removal of trees and creating field breaks, but also prescribed fire had over 75% of respondents were very supportive of that. And then lightning ignited fire, managed fire or letting lightning ignited fires burn had 75% of respondents still supporting that. So we thought that was a good sign that, you know, there's a lot of local support for all kinds of forest management activities. And this was, the survey was out in the summer of 2022, you know, so the tunnel and the pipeline fires were pretty active during this period. So it was actually really encouraging to see that folks were still okay with seeing a lot more, seeing more fire on the ground in their survey responses. We also asked about some specific support for flood mitigation and different things that could be done for flood mitigation. And once again, these were pretty highly supported. Over 75% of respondents thought many different activities would have their support, especially reforestation in burned areas, always a winner. Trying to do channel redesign to direct water flow, engineering work to mitigate flood risk. Those were all very popular. 75% respondents also thought continued forest binning and the use of prescribed fire would have their support. There was slightly less support, but still over 50% of respondents, around just over 60% respondents actually supported using federal grants to purchase properties. As well. And then I think the answers to these questions are really interesting for this group in particular, because survey respondents were very supportive of using partnerships to continue this forest management work, where around 90% of respondents in both the 2019 and the 2022 survey agreed that partnerships between the city, the Forest Service, and other organizations are the best way to address fire risk in Flagstaff. So keep going. High support for that. And then just around 3/4 of respondents in the 2019 survey, we asked about FLIP to reduce wildfire and flood risk in Flagstaff, and there was a pretty high support there. We didn't ask that question again in 2022, but it seems like partnerships were very highly supported. And then, so overall, from this kind of batch of questions, we see that there's really high levels of support for future forest management. There's really also, I think what is most interesting is that there's really positive responses for a diverse set of management strategies. And there's a pretty high rate of support for beneficial fire use. There's also continued support for future initiatives for implementing forest management. And it really seems to indicate that the public in Flagstaff, sometimes we get questions on whether or not we feel like these results can apply more broadly, because Flagstaff sometimes feels really unique. But what we do know is that there's a really high public understanding of fire and what needs to be done to tackle fire in the Flagstaff area. And we hope that this can kind of serve as a model for other regions. There's also really high support. I mean, there is high support, but we've also heard from folks on the back of surveys and with a lot of interviews and other areas of CAT's work that folks would really appreciate more in-depth communication about all these different treatments and what is actually being done and the rationale behind them. Folks are generally supportive, but want to know a little bit more details and be a little engaged in that way. And so we just have until 12:10, I think, on so actually, I'm going to skip over that. So I'm just going to go over a few kind of recommendations pulling from multiple studies, from all these multiple studies, because we kind of threw at you about 4 different major studies that we've done. And then we have a few minutes for questions. But essentially, some major recommendations pulling from the different surveys over the years was that it seems, and the post-fire cost calculation work, is that it seems to make sense to wait 3 to 5 years to really, after a fire happens, to be able to more fully evaluate the full costs that are involved, because the active suppression costs are actually such a small component of what these fires actually entail. We also really wanted to emphasize that there's strong connections between what folks are doing to prepare for these events and then their mental health impacts that they report after these events. So encouraging folks to be prepared, always a good path forward. And then that there is really a need to communicate with folks about getting and then keeping flood insurance, if that makes the most sense for many of these areas, especially around that 2-year after a fire mark, because folks are often dropping their insurance around that point. Not everyone, but it becomes kind of more common to drop your insurance around that point, but the flood risk can continue. So making sure that communications around flood insurance are kind of targeting that timeline. And then once again, residents seem to be really interested in trying to engage in more nuanced discussions around forest management. Why is this occurring? When? Where's the material going? What is the benefit of all this work? Just kind of engaging the public in those conversations, just providing more information about the management approaches and the decision rationale. And then there's also, there's some disconnect between the short-term impacts of management. Folks don't always like to see prescribed fire smoke, but they are overall supportive of prescribed fire. So just emphasizing those long-term benefits of the different management strategies. And then a lot of folks like to move into the Flagstaff area. I myself did this 2 years ago. So continuing to communicate and engage with new residents as they move in, especially if they're coming from places that might not have this kind of fire history and this level of engagement. And we have a QR code here and a website here that is has all of these studies on there. There's a lot. So Melanie handed out a couple fact sheets. Those are linked on this website, as well as our white papers and publications. We haven't, that new paper on the return on investment study that Melanie talked about is maybe not quite linked onto this website, but it is up now. Okay, never mind. As of this morning, it is on the website. So you should be able to find a lot of this information there. And so I think the fact sheets are really handy to have these short 2-pagers, but the in-depth reports and publications are there as well. So yeah, we have a couple more minutes for questions, but thanks for giving us the space to go over all this work.
Nikki, if you can go back to the recommendations bolded list there. I've got a question on the 3 related to kind of social engagement. The first one, engage residents in more nuanced discussion. We've talked a little bit about this in the past and the realities of the social side of different areas of town. What would the recommendation be for, best venue, best way to approach that, best way to start that?
I think a really easy starting point would be there's a lot of curiosity around what's being planned. And I think we're still making progress on having the public have a good grip on the process of what does it take to do a prescribed burn? What does it take to plan a treatment? We're talking years, not we woke up yesterday and decided it. But I think if we could have like a overview of the season plan, something like that, there would be a lot of interest and it would be a good venue to say, these are things we'd like to do. We don't know when they'll be, but we want to put it on your radar. So it's kind of like an expectation setting public meeting. I think something like that would work really well. In surveys in the past, we've asked, I did a survey in parks a couple of years ago, one in Mountain Air and Kachina Village. People want public meetings. Whether they'd come to them or not is another question. Like we talk a lot about being, or I think people respond to surveys of the most ideal version of themselves, possibly. But I'd say something that's out of either fire stations or kind of at like the HOA scale might be a good strategy, or maybe, yeah, by fire district.
That was going to be my follow-up. Is we talked a little bit after you guys did some social science research on kind of best points of contact and how to get into those different social environments. Anything kind of further there, or?
That's a good question.
Like the example that we've all kind of interacted with over the last couple of years is Flagstaff First, and we know who that point of contact is and how to get with them, how to get in front of them, and that kind of stuff. Are there any other groups that have organized themselves like that that can help us in that regard that you guys are aware of, or? That's all. I might be kind of a loaded question, but I mean, it's like right now for us, it's just social media.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I think I don't know that we've done work to ask like specifically who in the community would you want to talk to about this, aside from general, like City of Flagstaff, general Forest Service type questions.
Yeah.
Like zooming more into particular types of roles or individuals we haven't gone that deep. But I think we have seen some work, like I'm thinking about Jack's work out at Parks. Jack is a recent graduate in the School of Forestry, and like it's context dependent, right? So in Parks, for example, there's that community gas station and market, and like if the neighborhood or the community has a central hub of some kind, like using those types of places to post up information, like if people are going to be not engaging in social media, or you're not going to go door to door, and like the realities of actually getting this out, like if there's these sort of links in the chain that you can use, like a local gas station, and so I'm like trying to think like what would that be in the City of Flagstaff context. I don't know, is that like somebody at the farmer's market? Is that I'm like putting out ideas right now, so
super helpful. Yeah.
but yeah, like sort of targeting like the next layer. We certainly talk about HOA leaders being a good one. If you are in contact with other community champion type individuals, which often make themselves known, right? They come to you, and then they want more than just like, I think the nuanced discussion piece is like, we're at the point in Flagstaff where they don't need to know necessarily the big why. I mean, we want to keep articulating why this is important, but there's a lot of interest in the how piece of it. Not necessarily like every step in how we do a prescribed fire, but like general summary of why we're doing it at this time and what are the critical factors. And we're working, Matt mentioned it, but we're going to work with the Flagstaff Ranger District to try to dig into how much people understand about prescribed fire and like that, get a little bit more into the operational pieces of it, and begin to like learn more about that.
Awesome. Thank you. I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I just want to add, and thanks you guys for presenting today. It's been great. And I just wanted to add that when FWPP began, GFFP hosted meetings, and it was a lot better for the Forest Service having that partnership to host the meetings because we could command better attendance through all of our networks. And we did that. Also, sometimes we went to meetings that were already scheduled, like some of the communities had monthly meetings. So I would join, or someone from GFFP would join with the Forest Service and talk to the communities. So I think, there are a lot of good ideas. And I think honestly, like we all could get together and come up with a strategy of how we get the outreach and how we reach these communities and how we get the attendance that we need to make it worth it. But I did find that when you combine, say, a not-for-profit or even, somebody from the university like ERI or School of Forestry with an agency, that you really get better results.
And maybe just to add to your question, Paul, really quickly, Sarah's done a lot of kind of interesting research recently about local businesses and the Chamber of Commerce. Like those groups come into contact with so many people from out of town, and local businesses are really, really willing. They want to play that part. They just don't know what information to share. So I think that's a really easy spot in there. And then local outdoor recreation groups, they really want to be messengers too. So two maybe untapped places. I don't know if you want to add anything, Sarah.
No, I think that covers it. I think a lot of local businesses in the area are super enthusiastic about getting involved. They just need kind of a link to know.
Yeah.
Kind of need to be given those materials so that they're giving like an accurate message.
Sarah, follow up to that. Would that be the strategy to communicate and engage with new residents as well?
I think so. I think that they're just great interceptors of kind of all sorts of folks. Specifically, my research looked at kind of like how these businesses engaged with folks around fire restrictions and human cognition prevention. And I think that kind of the lessons we learned from that are definitely applicable to sharing messaging around planning and forest management in general.
Okay.
Yeah. I think realtors, that's another group. I don't know if there's like a Flagstaff realtors, realty group or something to have information in the new homeowner packet there.
I've gone to, there's a couple of like business leadership groups that you kind of hit some of those business leaders and the Tim Kinney, construction, those kinds of people that know a lot of people and talk to a lot of people. And it's just educating. And then I think, I'm surprised Ann didn't say this, maybe that's why her hand's back up, but GFFP has done some really good smoke type publications that we did mostly down in Sedona, because that's where all the smoke was going. But, I think there's some opportunities. Some people still read the newspaper and get those inserts that have, you can educate people on that.
Yeah, we have a survey out to every household in Sedona and Camp Verde right now about smoke impacts to their households.
Well, thanks for that.
We'll be able to tell you all about that.
We all got a lot of paper cuts stuffing envelopes.
Diane, I think you had something.
Did you guys ask whether people are willing to pay? In terms of, you detected a lot of support for forest management, but did you test their appetite for another FWPP or something like that?
We did. We asked that in 2019. We had a series of questions in that follow-up survey, the 2019 survey following the museum fire that we put out really quickly after that fire, and had a bunch of questions that asked, or a section that asked about support for another initiative like FWIP. So paying into something like that, and then there was one around how much income or what, I'm
Yeah, we had a few,
forgetting the
like, how
exact
much would they wanna pay for
question.
fuel treatment, and then for like risk to be reduced to their house, we framed it in a few different ways, and I think the average was somewhere around $13 a month per household. And it was kind of interesting when you put that against household income. You expect it is a little bit lower with lower income, then it increased and it kind of reached a peak at around 100,000, and then the wealthier you got, the less interested in paying again.
Full insurance replacement, that's why they don't care. Interesting, okay.
But we haven't done like an actual willingness to pay study.
Yeah.
We are looking into, yeah, like taking the return on investment and building more empirical, like getting less like looking at the literature and doing some more primary research, which would include probably some willingness to pay work, looking at this, maybe not in the Flagstaff area, but a little bit more across the West.
Thank you for that. That's super great info.
Really good stuff.
Something that just popped up in my head was we could potentially look at the evacuation zones and just work together to start assigning communication points of contact for each zone. Not something that we're trying to definitely say each one needs its own, but you know, go to, each one of those groups and tell Noah to
Well, like the
start thinking about like,
design for
yeah.
like file-based communities, so they have someone for each road who's responsible for disseminating information. You got a few busybodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have too many of I mean,
Is it
we got a lot of
real
busybodies, but we don't have too many.
Concentrated children.
But I like the evacuation zones, one, to get people to understand what evacuation zone they're in, because most people, if you ask them, do you know what evacuation zone you're in?
Absolutely not.
Me neither.
I thought it was only for the city. I thought it was only for the city.
I mean, we did a big thing when emergency management first redistrict all that, the evacuation zones, they did a huge push out, but I can't remember what mine is. So,
So just to keep in mind with that though, the way that we built that map is it's built to zoom down to your parcel level. So in evacuation zones, just your neighborhood, I just want to clear that up for clarification purposes. real quick. So it's more designed for you at your own parcel level, as opposed to like, if you don't know your evacuation zone, that's not necessarily a bad thing or a detriment. I just don't want to put anything out there that's going to be.
Exactly that.
You'll find it when you need it.
Yeah, right.
It's open for the ready, set, go alerts. to come
Exactly,
to the
yeah.
county.
To throw out to you guys is the city has a grant to do community outreach for forest and do events for forest that is hitting next week, and we have to do 7 events and like 4 community outreach events, and those are points where we're going to be looking for those community buildings where people meet, where community leaders meet, whether that's the HOA where only a very specific amount of people are actually looking at the pamphlets they leave in my mailbox, or whether that's, you know, some other community group. It'd be interesting to give that information to you and tag along.
Oh,
Mhm.
let us know.
Yeah, that's exciting, because sometimes we struggle to not just find the time to make those things happen, but decide where we're gonna go do it, whether it means we're just literally gonna go set up a booth at Olson's Grain or something, you know what I mean, and be there for a weekend day for a couple hours, chat with folks. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can improve in that space.
I mean, science in the park this
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah.
Something GFFB we used to do science in the park a lot. We haven't since COVID, but I know the county's gonna be there, you guys are gonna be there, so, you know, that's.
Went to the discussion about where do we organize these things. I was talking with Neil the other day, the work we did out in parks about smoke. There was a decent subset of the population out there who didn't believe that HEPA filters worked. Or they had like questions about science behind how a HEPA filter worked, and they were really skeptical about investing in it because they didn't understand it. So we're talking about out in parks, the Texaco and the parks in the Pines Deli, set an example one up on a smoky day and have people come through and see it in action, then leave information like here's where you can buy one, here's how you can make a box fan for your house, so that then it's kind of evidence-based without you having to stage someone there all the time. The store owner is probably gonna love you donating them a filter, and then it's like it kind of sustains itself over time.
Well, we've got I'm working on the start of a report of where we have air quality monitors in specific buildings with and without HEPA filters so that we can actually hand that information off to people. But at the same time, I think in specific areas where people can go in and experience it firsthand, like huge deal, it makes a huge difference. So.
Yeah, if you get on the Purple Air website, we now have, how many more did you get recently?
Geez, we have 30 coming in for outdoor, and then we also have, I've set up 6 indoor ones at fire stations and the sustainability office, which don't happen to have the best air, as I'm learning. But when you put a HEPA filter in there, you really see a pretty decent impact.
Yeah, our plan is to both monitor at a finer scale, like where the smoke's going and how long and what intensity. Kind of a neighborhood scale attempt, and then also the indoor air. So we can go to people and be like, hey, look, we've got the local data. These people who ran a filter in their house, had this much better air. And it's not gonna be the most, robust study in the world, but it's gonna be real data from real neighborhoods here.
Create these like do like different air quality parts per million, like jelly bean jars for people to guess different.
The city recently, we pushed in another $40,000 worth of purchasing air filters and donating those. But the do-it-yourself ones, if people don't qualify for one of our free ones, I mean, for about $40 at Home Depot, you can kind of build one. So trying to get people comfortable with, you don't necessarily need to get $200 fancy little hip filter. You can build your.
I do think the societal impact of the city being able to just give those out for free and the word of mouth that happens in Flagstaff has had a pretty significant impact on the numbers of applicants we've got. Even when when I was doing that program last spring, we only gave out 40, and then we filled up our capacity like within a couple of weeks last time. So now we have way more coming in, and we're like, when does it cap out? But I think it's great.
It's showing up on social media. Well, I know we're behind on, we'll get to it, but I've seen people now, when people online are complaining on social media about smoke impacts, other people in the community are saying, get a HEPA filter. Well, thank you for that presentation. That was great. I'm gonna include a link as well. There was a Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation put on an updated survey on Western voter views of beneficial fire, and it has, Diane, some narratives in there about not, I think, specifics on what people are willing to pay, but just willingness to pay in general. So I'll send that out with an update from the meeting. Next agenda item, I believe, was DFFM. JP, are you still with us? Anybody from DFFM still with us? Might be gone. Maybe we don't have a DFFM update. Any other forest industry updates? It's like Tavi, you might be our industry update representative.
Well, yeah, I can add a little bit. So I think Jake did a great job of describing a lot of the projects, and I think he alluded to some things that I'll just pick up on a little bit. Markets are not super strong right now, but the products that we produce that mostly go for pallets are a little bit separated from that market. When markets are strong, a lot of times those lower value pieces of timber that go into pallets are harder to get. So sometimes when markets are strong, that also pulls up the markets here for pallet stock. But then, at some point, all those fall down, those lower quality pieces of wood are available. But so I guess there's just a little bit of a disconnect between, markets in general versus what we're actually doing here. But I think folks probably know R4 laid off most of their logging force, and so that's quite a big impact to getting acres treated. And then they're still working through their log deck, so it'll be an interesting winter going in to see how the local markets kind of recover from that. I think that's all I got. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Oh, that's good, Tommy. Thanks.
Neil, Fry is doing kind of
tell the story of Forefry, you know, the success stories. And so for the industry stuff, I was tasked with getting all these industry numbers of investments and things. And most of this has happened within the last 3 to 5 years. And I don't have all the data yet, but I'm already at, on just the west side here, $44 million invested outside of R4. That's what industry is invested. And R4 has $121 million in sawmill assets that they've invested. And then if you go to east side, right now I've just got some, just a couple that I've had, but they're going to be in that 30 to 35 million, $36 million invested. So that puts us pretty high. I mean, we're talking nearly $200 million in industry investment. Then you add in all the partners, the City of Flag, Coconino, the nonprofits, all the different things. The number that kind of really struck me was that, so Scott Rogers told us $171 million was invested through Bill and IRA funds on Forefry. If you add up all of our local investments between industry, nonprofits, local governments, we're at like 270. I mean, for every dollar basically this is what I came down to. For every dollar the Forest Service has invested in Forefry, everybody else has invested $1.50. That's pretty dang good. I mean, that's a good deal for the Forest Service, in my opinion. And I think it's something that we're going to try to put into this story that, hey, there's a positive story here that we are locally invested into, and in industry especially. And, you know, we were down there talking with Secretary Vilsack and USDA, and we were a little underwhelmed with his acknowledgement of industry and the role they play in making any forest restoration successful. And so again, it's one of those, we just kind of have to keep beating that drum that without industry, we're going to be back to doing nothing again.
Well, we can trend it with fire that it just looks hideous for a while. Trending with fire is not easy to do in the WUI. Okay, so events and announcements. There's the next wood utilization community of practice call Thursday, September 26th, 10 to 11. Details for that are in the agenda. And then our next GFFP meeting has also been moved. So October 23rd, 10 to 11:30. That'll be here at City Hall, but the conference room upstairs. So not this one, the one up the stairs over there.
Forest Biomass is going to meet on October 2nd in this room.
October 2nd, Forest Biomass Coalition meeting. Any other news or updates? Anyone online? No. All right. I got 3 minutes early.
The wrap. Well done.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.